In the morning of April 12, 1861, the sky over Charleston Harbor was quiet. Too quiet. Then, at 4:30 a.m., a single cannon fired from Fort Johnson. Its target wasn't a foreign enemy. It was Fort Sumter, an American fort, manned by American soldiers, flying the American flag. That cannonball didn't just start a battle. It shattered the idea that the United States was indivisible. What followed would become the deadliest conflict in American history, more lethal than World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and Korea combined. Brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, a nation against itself. This is not just the story of generals and battlefields. This is the story of ordinary Americans forced to choose sides in a war that would decide what the United States was and who it was willing to become. I'm Clyde Chester, and this is History of United States. The Civil War didn't begin with gunfire. It began with arguments. In kitchen tables in Ohio, in church pews in Georgia, in newspaper columns in Boston and Richmond. By the mid-1800s, the United States was technically one nation, but culturally it was two very different Americas. The North, industrial, urbanizing, powered by factories, railroads, and immigrant labor. The South, agrarian, rural, economically dependent on plantation agriculture and enslaved labor. Slavery wasn't just a moral issue. It was an economic system, a political fault line, a cultural identity. And every time the country expanded westward, the same question returned like a ticking clock. Would new states be free or slave? Compromises postponed the reckoning. They never solved it. To understand the Civil War, we have to confront an uncomfortable truth. Slavery wasn't abstract. It was lived daily by millions of human beings. Enslaved men and women built the wealth of the South, were denied literacy, had families torn apart by auction blocks. In places like Charleston, New Orleans, and Natchez, slavery was visible, woven into everyday life. In the North, many opposed slavery morally, but even there, racism was common. The war wasn't fought because everyone suddenly agreed slavery was wrong. It was fought because the system had become unsustainable. And when abolitionist voices grew louder, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, William Lloyd Garrison, the South heard something else entirely, a threat to their way of life. In 1860, a tall, awkward lawyer from Illinois won the presidency, Abraham Lincoln. He didn't even appear on ballots in most southern states. To the South, Lincoln represented federal overreach, the eventual end of slavery, political domination by the North. Within weeks of his election, states began to leave the Union. South Carolina first, then Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. They formed the Confederate States of America. Abraham Lincoln hadn't fired a shot, but the Union was already breaking. When Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter, Lincoln called for volunteers. The Civil War had begun. Both sides thought it would be quick. They were wrong. The first major battle, Bull Run, ended in chaos. Civilians picnicking on hillsides fled in panic. The war would last 4 years, and it would be brutal beyond imagination. New technologies made old tactics deadly: rifled muskets, mini-balls, ironclad ships. Soldiers died not just from bullets, but from disease, dysentery, typhoid, infections that modern medicine could have cured. Entire towns emptied of young men. In places like Gettysburg, Antietam, and Shiloh, the ground ran red. Antietam alone, 23,000 casualties in a single day, the bloodiest day in American history. While armies clashed, civilians endured their own war. Southern cities faced shortages, women ran farms and businesses, children grew up without fathers. In the North, factories boomed, draft riots erupted, especially in New York City. Immigrants were conscripted into a war they barely understood. And for enslaved people, the war opened a dangerous door. Many fled plantations, others sabotaged quietly. Some followed Union troops seeking freedom behind blue lines. They called it self-emancipation. In 1863, Lincoln made a move that changed the war and the nation: the Emancipation Proclamation. It did not free all enslaved people immediately, but it redefined the war as a fight against slavery, allowed black men to serve in the Union Army, made compromise with the Confederacy nearly impossible. Nearly 180,000 African American soldiers would serve, many fighting for freedom, some fighting for a country that still didn't fully accept them. Their courage helped turn the tide. Part 7: Grant, Sherman, and Total War. As the war dragged on, Union generals changed strategy. Ulysses Grant, relentless, unyielding, willing to absorb losses to break Confederate armies. William Tecumseh Sherman, devastating. His march through Georgia wasn't just military, it was psychological. Railroads destroyed, crops burned, the Confederacy's will to fight shattered. War had become total. In April 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee met Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. No surrender spectacle, no humiliation. Grant offered generous terms. Lee accepted. The war was over, but the cost was staggering. Over 620,000 dead, a nation scarred. 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, shot in Ford's Theater. The man who had held the Union together never saw the peace he fought for. Reconstruction loomed. Freedom was fragile. The country faced a new question. What does victory mean when the wounds are this deep? The Civil War didn't end America's arguments. It defined them. Federal power, race, citizenship, memory. You can still feel it in monuments, in regional pride, in debates that refuse to die. The Civil War isn't past, it's present. Because to understand the United States, its pain, its promise, its contradictions, you have to understand the moment it nearly destroyed itself and somehow survived. I'm Clyde Chester, and this has been History of United States.